Choosing the right location to deploy the Ranger is important. Look for a nice flat place with plenty of clearance in all directions. Scan the horizon. Make sure you don't have a lot of tall buildings or towers that might impede the radar beam. The Storm Ranger truck is equipped with stabilizers, but we really don't want to have to use those to lift the truck. We just want to stabilize it. So a level surface is important.
Well, now that you've found an appropriate place to park the Ranger, it's time to get out of the truck and do a walk around. We just want to make sure we got a nice firm foundation for the outriggers, and we've got plenty of room to make a quick escape in case the weather gets too bad. Just check things like the level. The more level the surface you start with, the less work you have to do in the setup process. And the more level the truck is, well, the more accurate the data is going to be.
Okay, now that we've established we've got a good place to deploy the Rangers and we know we have a nice level platform, we need to take a quick look inside the radome just to make sure nothing has jarred loose or fell off the radar or anything of that nature. And also, in some cases, we may have to be sure that someone hasn't left the safe operate switches in the safe mode. You'll see there's an emergency stop inside the radome as well, along with two safe operate switches, one for azimuth and one for elevation. We just want to make sure those are all in the operate position. Once we've established that everything's good inside the radome and it's safe to go ahead and power up the system, we'll have to go ahead and put the radome access cover back on. The access cover is pretty light, and so one person can pretty much put the cover on by themselves. In our particular case, we're going to have Jeff demonstrate how to put the cover back on. Pretty simple. Slide the two L brackets behind the lip, push it around, and then rotate the two locking handles. We have to assume that in some cases the Ranger is going to be deployed in bad weather situations, and the lift is going to be up above the cab. So even in a slightly windy condition, there may be some movement. So the truck is equipped with outriggers, one on each corner of the back section of the truck where the radome is housed. Jeff's going to demonstrate how we set those up. As you can see, there's 4 retaining bolts. You have to loosen those up with your hands, pull the outrigger out. It is labeled up. Just always keep that label up as it says, and pretty much just set it back in place and screw the 4 retaining bolts back onto it. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, we're not going to actually install all 4 outriggers, as the procedure is the same for the remaining 3. But we did want you to see exactly how you do install the outrigger. So we're going to just let Jeff carry on here and get those 4 retaining bolts on there. Now these don't have to be extremely tight, but you want to make sure you cinch them down pretty good by hand. Now keep in mind these outriggers aren't designed to really lift the truck. They're there more for stabilization. That's one of the reasons it's important to have the truck on a level surface. You'll find the remaining part of the outrigger, the actual lifting jack, in the storage bin just behind the cab on the driver's side below the generator housing. It's a pretty simple device. It has a locking pin and a channel. And we'll just simply pull that pin and mate the jack lifting mechanism up with the outrigger, and then we'll reinstall the pin. Okay, once you got the pin in, it's just a simple matter of screwing the jack handle until the bottom portion, the foot, I guess you would call it, extends all the way down to the ground. It's going to take a little time. And as I said before, the idea here is to stabilize the truck. We're not going to try to lift the truck up just off the ground or anything of that nature. We just want to make sure that all four corners are firmly planted, on the ground via these lifting jacks. And this should, eliminate any swaying or movement of the system during windy conditions. So you just want to get that down on the ground. Make a couple of turns once it hits the ground so it's nice and firm. Okay, once you've got the outriggers installed, now's a good time to walk around and look at the levels. Just, make minor adjustments if you need to. We're on a pretty level spot here, so we're looking good. Of course, taking the outriggers off is more or less the reverse process of what you've just seen.
The Storm Ranger is equipped with an onboard generator but can also be operated on shore power. In most cases in the field, you'll be operating off the generator. The generator is located behind the vented panel on the driver's side, and there is actually a start switch on the generator itself, but the more convenient way to start the generator is from inside the cab. You'll find there's a start switch in the upper console, as you'll see in the image here. Jeff's going to demonstrate how to start the generator. It's pretty simple. Just simply push the toggle switch up and you should hear the generator fire up. Once the generator is fired up, you can pretty much continue with the startup procedure. Well, now that we have the generator up and running, it's time to move inside the cab. Fortunately, everything is laid out pretty well in here, and you can pretty much go from top to bottom. Just locate the UPS on-off switch on the upper left-hand portion of the console and turn that on. Move down to the inverter, turn that on. You'll see some indicators there to indicate it's actually powered up. Choose the shore or generator power. In most cases, you'll select generator. And then there are two banks of breakers. The video itself will walk you through the absolute necessary breakers. There are some optional breakers here. Some of the breakers are actually for lights and things of that nature, and are not necessarily used all the time. You could simply, by default, turn on every breaker, and that would be fine. In the video here, you'll see that we skip over some of the breakers that are just for the utility lights and the exterior lights and things of that nature. But we do want to make sure that the air conditioner breakers are turned on. And there are actually two of those. So enable both air conditioners, air conditioner 1 and air conditioner 2. And then we'll move down to the lower breaker panel. Lower breaker panel, we're going to turn on the DC mains. In this case, we've turned on the interior dome lights. But again, a lot of the breakers there are actually for lights. But one important breaker you'll see there is the meter control. And that's a good one to turn on to get a sanity check. As you'll notice when you turn that meter breaker on, that the panel illuminates and the meters actually for the DC and AC voltages will light up. And you can get a good idea that everything's good by just looking at those meters. And then we'll move back down to the very bottom, enable all the cooling systems and the exhaust fan. Last thing we want to do is just make sure that the emergency stop switch is not depressed. You can simply twist it quarter turn and let it pop out if it happens to be depressed. Now you're ready to move to the next step. Now that we've completed the in-cab power-up sequence, we're going to move to the outside and actually go to the radar equipment rack. It consists of several components. The UPS at the bottom, have the radar control processor at the top. This is mostly for antenna control and bite. Have the radar control panel itself, which houses the e-stop reset button, as well as the emergency stop switch, and a couple of breakers. For the most part, these breakers should be left in the on position, as the power control itself is actually done from inside the cab. Here's the air conditioner thermostat. This is a good indicator that the UPS is on if you see indicators there. Then we have the managed power controller, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. This actually controls the power to each component in the rack and can be remotely accessed to allow us to reboot things if we need to um, while the system's in the field. Then you have the local edge workstation and the signal processor, the IQ2 DST, which is an acronym for downstairs. Actually, there's a UST in the pedestal and a DST downstairs. Then there's the KVM keyboard and display. This basically lets you select which computer you want to actually view and control. So you can actually extend that out and open it up, and you have a monitor and a keyboard there. So that's the basic equipment in the rack. The first step we've got to do is actually turn on the UPS. And the video here will just step you through the sequence for doing that. So you want to select through the control menu option, select one, turn off on option. Pardon the camera work here. I was trying to get an angle where the sun wasn't glaring so much on the screen. Then we're going to turn on UPS. Option appears. Then we'll just say yes, turn it on. And the UPS will now power up. Now the first thing that's going to happen when the UPS powers up is it's going to actually turn on the WTI power controller. And the WTI power controller actually has an operating system built into it, so it's not an instant on device. It does take some time for it to boot. So at this point you'll have about 2 minutes that you'll have to wait for the WTI power controller to boot up. And as soon as it does, the BIOS of each of the computers in the rack is set such that they will automatically come on. While that's happening, you might want to check your UPS just to make sure your input voltages and your output voltages look okay along with your frequency. And you're pretty much done. You can close the outside equipment door and move back to the cab to complete the startup. Well, as we mentioned in step 7, it does take the WTI about 2 minutes to boot, so we thought we'd just give you another look at that. The WTI is completely booted now, so it's time to lift the pedestal. So the up-down controller is located in the compartment just to the right of the radar equipment rack. It's fairly simple, only 2 buttons, up and down. And we found through experience that the best way and the smoothest way to lift the antenna is just to simply hold the up button until the lift fully extends. Trying to feather it up and down usually results in just bumping the lift up and down. So it'll stop when it gets fully extended. So just hold the up button until it stops. You can see it's just above the cab there, so you'll get an idea after using it a few times that where the maximum extension point is. The next thing you'll want to do for safety reasons is to install the pins that keep the lift from lowering should the hydraulics fail. They're stored neatly in a hole nearby the safety hole. There's one on each side. You can see better on this view here how it stops the roller from coming back towards the back, which would allow the lift to go down. And another important safety feature is the pedestal power interlock. There's a switch located at the base of the lift. You can see it in the image here. Pedestal power will not be applied until that contact is closed. So it's always good to glance in there just to make sure that contact is closed fully, as this will allow the pedestal to power up now. So we're almost there. We're almost ready to start up edging, start looking at weather. We just wanted to revisit the rack one more time before we jump in the cab and give you a look at the WTI managed power controller in the fully booted state. So you can see the indicators there that show that it is fully booted, and the LED stack showing the current draw on each branch, A and B, 4 plugs per branch. And there's also a breaker for each branch there that if there's a current surge, it could pop that breaker. Easily reset. Just a quick look at all the equipment before we close it up. And finally, get inside the cab. As you enter the cab of the truck, you'll notice there is a control panel here as well, also equipped with the e-stop reset button. Now this button is very important, and we'll mention it several times because it must be depressed after the WTI power manager control switch is fully booted. You'll just need to press and hold the e-stop reset button for about 5 seconds, then release it. This will reset the safety relay and allow power to be applied to the pedestal. It must also be hit and released after an emergency stop switch is depressed. Now that you're in the cab and settled in, you'll be presented with the first screen that you've got to advance through. This is the KVM login screen. Typically, the systems are shipped without a username or password, so what you'll need to do is to simply advance through these fields to get to the computer selection. To do that, simply hit return 3 times, or the enter key. You'll then be presented with a menu that shows you the available computers attached to the KVM, and we'll want to arrow down to select the Edge computer. This will be the computer that we'll be viewing all the time as we're looking at weather data on the StormRanger system. To log into the Edge workstation, you will be required to enter a username and a password. Typically, root will be the username and the password will be the EEC job number preceded by the prefix EECJ. To simplify the startup procedure, each StormRanger is preloaded with a startup script. This can be activated with a single mouse click on the Ranger Startup Recovery icon. As the script is run, a printout of each activity will be presented in a terminal screen. The purpose of the script is to preset the operating parameters of the Ranger system. Once the script has completed, the terminal screen will disappear. Starting the Edge user interface is a simple process. Click the Edge icon, then the monitoring icon, then the surveillance icon. You're now presented with the surveillance screen, which controls the radar system. Now click the forecasting icon and the real-time display icon. And finally, the radiate button. The system is now considered operational and ready for data analysis and transmission of weather information. Since the StormRanger is a mobile radar system, it is equipped with a GPS system. Each time the system is moved from one location to the other, the latitude, longitude, and heading information is gathered by the EDGE program and used to correctly offset the maps so they correspond with the current position of the StormRanger system. That data can be verified in a variety of ways shown here, either through REX commands, through a minicom utility that actually spits out the serial data being ingested by EDGE, or through the data log files. Either method may be used to verify that the actual location of the Ranger system matches the GPS information used by EDGE to correct the maps to correctly position the Ranger system. The log files are created each day the system is operational and contain all the NEMA information gathered from the GPS data input to the EDGE system. The log files may be viewed with a simple text editor or simply catting them to the terminal screen. You can then locate the line that contains the angle, or I should say the heading, latitude, and longitude information, and compare that to, say, a cell phone app to again verify that the locations do match and the GPS data is correct. To facilitate the transmission of the radar digital data from the local machine to the remote edge machine, you must start the communications script. This is accomplished by single-clicking on the c2enter.sh icon located on the desktop. Once the script is activated and running, you can then minimize the terminal window. It's important that you only minimize the terminal window, as closing the window could actually stop the communication script. The Edge workstation will come factory loaded with the TeamViewer application. It's always a good idea to make sure the TeamViewer application is running anytime you're using the radar system. Always note the ID and password of the computer and provide that information back to EEC for remote support. An alternative to the full TeamViewer application is just the EEC Quick Support program. Simply single click on the EEC Quick Support icon and you will be presented with an ID and a password that can be provided to EEC to allow for remote access and support while the system is in the field. The Edge Surveillance GUI is the user interface to interact with the radar system. Rather than go into detail regarding each parameter, the best form of relaying the information is to simply state the typical values for each parameter. Most of these parameters are user dependent and can be varied throughout a range of settings. But with the Ranger system, there has been some established settings for the various parameters. And those being the most typical, will most likely be the operational mode most of the time. So as you watch the screen here, you'll see each parameter is highlighted and the typical value is flashed on the screen for a few seconds. As I say, in most cases, these values will apply for all Ranger systems, although things like clutter filters will vary slightly depending on the location, as the amount of clutter around the site could also vary. And of course, with a mobile system, the location will constantly change as the system is moved from place to place. The zcal value is the calibration value for the system and should never be changed. The gaseous attenuation is also constant and it should not be changed. The antenna control mode is user selectable, but most of the time the system will run in a PPI mode of operation. When the StormRanger mission is complete, there will be a time to shut down the system. This should be done in a systematic way. We provided a graceful system shutdown script that will systematically shut down each of the computers within the Ranger system. It will always pre-position the antenna first to the travel mode, which is the 0 and 90 degrees elevation. It will also turn off the radiate as well as the servo power, and then finally the radar power. Then each computer will be logged into and the shutdown command will be issued. This is much more graceful than simply turning off the power to the system and will preserve the life of each of the disk drives in the computers. Once the shutdown script has completed, it's safe to move the StormRanger to the next position for its next mission.